Hello and welcome to another virtual event with Tattered Cover. My name is Adam. I am the director of events for Tattered Cover, which, if you don't know, is the largest independent bookstore in Colorado. And we have been around for 50 years, which, if you don't know, that's kind of amazing in the book world. And it's really thanks to readers like you and writers like our guest tonight. So thank you for supporting independent bookstores. Thank you for supporting Tattered Cover, especially for those who are here tonight. If you need closed captioning, there is a closed captioning bar at the bottom of your YouTube video. It's a black button that says CC. You can just click that and it'll come up and you'll get closed captioning. If you want to purchase Maggie Smith's new book of poetry, I put a link in the chat. You can click that and get the book through tatteredcover.com. You can also check out tatteredcover.com/event for more virtual events. We do have a few more coming up and we're gonna have some in person. So if you're in Denver, please check out tatteredcover.com/event, especially. We would love to see you in store. Tonight, I am so stoked to have Maggie Smith, who has a new book of poetry called Goldenrod. She is the author of Good Bones, The Well Speaks of Its Own Poison, Lamp of the Body, and the national bestseller Keep Moving, Notes on Loss, Creativity, and Change. Her latest collection of poems, Goldenrod, is out now. Her poems and essays are widely published and anthologized, appearing in the Best American Poetry, the New York Times, the New Yorker, and so many more places. In 2016, her poem Good Bones went viral internationally and has been translated into nearly a dozen languages. In conversation with Maggie, we have Carrie Fountain, whose poems have appeared in Poetry Magazine, American Poetry Review, the New Yorker, and many others. Her first collection, Burn Lake, was a National Poetry Series winner, and her second collection, Instant Winner, was published in 2014. She has a debut novel for young adults, I'm Not Missing, which came out in 2018, and a children's book called The Poem Forest. So basically, we have two amazing writers who have been featured all over the world, and they're here in Denver, well, virtually with us. Maggie and Carrie, please unmute yourselves and let's meet the Denver virtual crowd, and we'll get this rocking and rolling.
Hi, thank you.
I will turn it over to you, lovely ladies. I know you all know each other, so I'm looking forward to this. Have a great event, and I'll be back with audience questions at the end.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you so much, Adam, and thank you to Tattered Cover for having us and Maggie. This book is so fabulous. I am loving also seeing people respond to it on social media. It's just, if we thought we needed Keep Moving, this one just hits the spot, as well. It's exactly the book of poems we need right now. I really just want to say thank you for writing it. I love it. It's gorgeous, but it's also just so multi-textured and full. It's so full. And I return to poems and they grow like before my very eyes each time I return to them.
And well, that's how I feel about the life.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. I wondered if I could ask you to start by reading one of the poems.
You have a request?
I do. I feel like you're like calling in a request on the radio. Will you play Maggie Smith's poem? I wondered actually if we could start with two poems and then kind of discuss them, because I think sharing, for sort of somebody who hasn't read the book yet, I thought like sharing two poems that kind of do show the multiple registers in which these poems fall would be really enlightening. So I thought that we could start with the poem on page 100 called, I'll give you the page number since you don't know which poems I'm going to be requesting.
No, I don't.
And I would love it if you could start with Wife for Scale.
Wife for Scale. Okay, Wife for Scale. I wonder if my college geology professor will ever encounter this poem.
Oh, wow.
Wife for Scale. This is a tender age, and in geologic time hardly an age at all, but a golden band of rock pressed paper thin will stand for these years, a kind of scientific shorthand. Once I had a professor whose wife was in every photo he took of rock formations. He'd click through slide after slide saying, "My wife for scale." Isn't there always a woman in the picture? And isn't she always small in comparison? Forgive me, that was my grief talking. Tell me, how do I teach myself to be alone? The strata for this age will not be the first to reveal what salt does to stone, as if a sea had been here and not sadness only. Tell me, with God a question, where is solace but in the earth? The soil I'm standing on in this moment, even as it shifts beneath my feet, as it gives and cannot hold me, will be rock.
I just feel like that poem does everything. It does everything that I want a poem to do. It's friendly to the reader. It's funny. You know, there's this very huge gesture, a huge human and spiritual and existential gesture being made, but by way of this very specific anecdote. And it's like the kind of poem that just makes my heart sing. It's also just like a journey of a poem. Like you enter it and you get really kind of comfortable in it. And then it takes you off, you know, like suddenly you're like, how did we get here? Oh my gosh. And then of course it's like, I don't think it's easy to come to a poem that says so much and so distinctly at the end. Like that ending is just soil I'm standing on in this moment, even as it shifts beneath my feet, that metaphor, as it gives and cannot hold me, will be rock. It's a hopeful ending for a poem. And I just feel like everything, it's like it's like a kind of, you know, a symphonic way that we get there. And I just am so taken by it. I just love that poem.
Thank you.
This is such a different register.
I'm so curious.
Well, I mean, I'm a little bit obsessed with this poem. I have to say, I've read it so many times, and I read it and I wonder, what I feel like it's a poem that is, it's so true, and like the poem itself is not raw, but it leaves me feeling raw, and it also opens up questions about, I mean, so many questions about, you know, our recent past in this country, and our overarching past in this country. And I think also there's something strange that it does in kind of like asking, you know, where we're headed. And I mean, okay, so I'm talking about this poem and I haven't even said which one it is.
I'm so curious.
It's the poem Tender Age.
Oh, the long one.
It's a longish poem.
Yeah, for me. What page is it on?
It's on page 51.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. And I just wondered if maybe you could read it and we could talk a little bit about it and kind of.
I haven't, you know, the only time I've ever read this poem aloud, besides when I was drafting it, because you have to read a poem aloud when you're drafting. The only time I've ever read this poem aloud, other than drafting it, was when I narrated the audiobook.
Is that right?
I've never read this poem aloud. And it's kind of an odd thing because there are some bracketed stanzas, and maybe I can show the audience at the beginning of the poem where I'll just read the brackets because it's sort of like an empty space, like a redaction in the poem. This is Tender Age. America, I've heard the audio, Papa, 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 bracket, unintelligible, bracket, inconsolable crying. America, my childhood neighborhood was called Freedom Colony. I lived on Liberty Lane. America, you are grand in theory, poor in practice. You are not what I learned in grade school. America, I'm proofreading a book on your Constitution. I'm considering the letter of the law, the spirit of the law. America, you've caged even the babies. They cry mostly in Spanish. America, this is you. America, what I miss most about church are the hymns, everyone singing the same word at the same time. Even the bells rang in unison. America, I'm wondering who your laws serve, the living or the dead. America, are there cribs for the babies, bars within bars? America, where does your conscience live? I mean, from where has it been removed? America, as a girl, I rode my bike around the cul-de-sacs, Lexington, Bunker Hill, Valley Forge. America, I can pick the stars and peel the stripes right off you. America, I'm considering the letter, the spirit. America, there is no substitute for conscience. I can still feel the bells in my hands. America, this is us. America, we have taken children from their mothers. We have separated words from their meanings. America, will there be neighborhoods named for this undeclared war? America, where are the babies? America, when we want to silence the bells, we extinguish their open mouths on our chests.
That ending, Maggie, that ending.
It comes from, you know, when I was a kid, I grew up in the Methodist church, and I went until I was 14, and then I decided I didn't want to go anymore, which is a different story for a different day. But I was in choir, and I was in bell choir. And so I would ring the bells, and that's exactly what you do. With the big ones, you pluck the little clappers, and the little ones you can silence in your hand. But the medium-sized bells you extinguish on your chest when you play them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me, I mean, can you just talk? I'm so curious. The whole time you were reading that poem, I was thinking, it's so interesting that you've never read that poem aloud, you know, but of course this is a new book, so you haven't had a million opportunities to read or to choose the poems that you're going to be reading from the book. Do you get a sense that this is a poem that you might not read as often as other poems? What is it about the poem? Yeah.
It's funny. I mean, I think you're right about register. Like, there are several different sort of threads, I think, running through Goldenrod. And one of them is a thread that I'm sort of comfortable with because it's a thread that's running through Good Bones too. And that is the thread of I'm raising kids and witnessing their lives. And in some cases, there's a sort of, it's not all happy, right? There's a sort of tension there because how do I do it? And they have questions I don't have answers for. So that has really continued from that last book. But something that I didn't do, at least as overtly in that book or in anything I've ever written until now, is address some things a little bit more directly in poems. And so it's like, it's a new space for me in a way. And I'm comfortable with it, but it does feel like a different kind of poem for me than what the kind of poem I'm used to writing.
Yeah.
I don't think I could have written this poem in my 20s, and not just because I wasn't a mother of kids in my 20s. I think there's something that comes from like getting to a place in your life and maybe even in just like your craft where you're more comfortable not looking at everything aslant, but kind of tilting yourself and facing things head on a little bit more. And yeah. I think that's what some of these poems are at least attempting to do.
Yes. Yeah, I really felt that in this poem. Like, I really admired the way you just, it's a direct kind of address, I mean, like literally addressing America and that Ginsbergian echo there.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I feel like as a writer, I wonder if you, I don't quite know how to ask this, but is it like the way that my dumb brain wants to ask the question?
Just ask. Yeah.
Hard.
For it.
It's hard to do that. But like, did you hesitate to do it? I mean, it's when you make when you're as direct as that, you are placing yourself in a position with your reader and with the world that I sometimes feel it's difficult to do, because I don't know why it's difficult to do it, but was it difficult for you to step into that space and write?
I mean, I think having public opinions is vulnerable, right?
Yes.
It's a vulnerable thing to have a public opinion. It's actually not that hard to write a vulnerable poem where I'm saying how much I love my children, or how much I wish them to get well when they're ill, or how much I miss them, or how much that kind of vulnerability for me is not difficult personally. But having an opinion that might be construed as political or ethical or moral, I think is a different thing, because you're putting yourself in a space for people to, I mean, you're not going to disagree with me when I say I love my children, but you might be able to disagree with me if I express outrage about something that's happening in this country. And I mean, a lot of it is just writing back and pushing up against this idea of us as a country feeling like above certain kinds of behavior. Like, this isn't us. I saw so much "this isn't us" language. Like, I can't believe this is happening. This isn't us. I can't believe we're doing this. This isn't us. It's us. Yeah. Like, it's us. I mean, we don't have to like it. And granted, we all didn't vote for the same people, and we don't all live in the same neighborhoods, and we don't, but it's us. Like, we have to reckon with, you're right, the near history of this country, the time when these poems were written. We have to reckon with what has happened in the distant history of this country, which is still with us and is still informing what we're doing now. And then where do we go? And I don't have an answer for the third, but I know I won't be able to come up with an answer if I'm not paying attention to question A or question B, because I want to think this isn't us. And so I think it did make me nervous to kind of go there in some of these poems. And I think I was a little bit more nervous even sending these out to journals, because I just thought, like, I don't know, maybe nobody really wants to hear this right now, but I just felt like it was the thing I needed to say. And I don't know how else to do it except in poems. I can only, I don't really have a soapbox to put out in front of my house to stand on. So poems are where I take these big questions and troubles. This is where I do my internal processing.
Right. I think sometimes when we think about political poems, it's like we think that we have to put ourselves in like a rhetorical posture, that I'm going to win an argument with this poem. But when I read that poem, what it evokes in me is not even a political agreement. Like, obviously I'm aligned with the political position of this poem, but to me it helps me kind of reckon within myself that what it means to be an American right now. And I think it's also this obviously this poem was written a couple of years ago, maybe a couple of years ago, or at least 8 years ago, over 8 years ago. And it does, I mean, and again, like, these problems don't vanish, with the departure of a single person in power. These are issues we have always been wrestling with and will always be wrestling with. But it gives me this kind of like spine tingling sense of knowing the poet you were when you wrote that poem didn't realize that it was possible that it was going to be over, that sense. We didn't know that then. We this could have been, and still we teeter, I think. Still we and there's a strange kind of recognition that your reader has, that the poet, the writer doesn't yet have, that is like off-putting and like it's not a comforting feeling, because we are still, these things don't change, but we work toward change, but they don't overnight.
Well, it's like
so anyway,
we're in it, but the it that we're in is slightly different, right? But we're still in it. Like this, all of this stuff, we're still wading through it, and we're going to be feeling the reverberations of all of those decisions and every decision leading up to them for years and years and years. I mean, and you can't unknow it. That's the sort of metaphor hidden, the turn of phrase hidden inside this metaphor is you can't unring the bell, right? You can stop it from ringing. But once it's made the sound, it's out, it's done. So, I have 2 children who know that there were babies in cages at our border. And how do you, growing up in this country, unknow that? You don't unknow it. And so I don't know what to do with it. And there isn't really an answer, but you're right. I mean, the poem is sort of a time capsule also for a very specific time in which it was written.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned I really wanted to ask you, because I feel like I have not heard it much in your work. And I know you said it was a question for another time, but you do, you mentioned an experience of church in these poems. And I mean, I'm more than comfortable using the word spiritual to describe your work, even though I sort of sometimes feel like cringy about it, because it's such a huge term. But there are certain poets who really earn it, and I think that these poems really earn that term. They're deeply, deeply spiritual in the sense that they are questioning, and they are looking and looking to uncover and making connections, kind of almost like connections beneath the scene, the scene, like SEEN. There's things happening, and I just, of course, that is just mind-blowing to me. That gesture in this book makes me think about my first poetry teacher in college. We were reading a book of the poet Adélia Prado. Do you know that poet?
Yes.
The Brazilian poet. I mean, her one, up until recently, she has had another book translated by Ellen Dore Watson, but her first book came out in like the early 90s. And she's, of course, she's written a million books in Brazilian Portuguese, and one little slim book had been translated. And I was like so taken by her work, and it was just so, it was so spiritually, it was so accessible to me. It was like walking into water, it was just like, so like, I was like so, deceivingly easy seeming. And I think I said something in class, like, they feel so easy to me to enter. They feel so, and I think and my poetry teacher at the time said, that is the mark of a master. They make it look easy.
It's like an Olympic gymnast who does the flip or the twist and the whatever and then lands, and you're like, there's just no way a human body can do that, but they do.
Yes. And I think it's the mark of a real masterful poet to be able to make those turns and resist perhaps the temptation to show how, to show how difficult it is, or to, that there's, it really, to me, that has rung true my entire reading life, in terms of poetry, that a masterful poet makes it look easy. They're such a master, they make it look easy. And so I think that's really what a lot of the poems here that kind of relate to the spiritual, the existential, the experience of being a human, the experience of being a parent, which is kind of like the most kind of, it's like a transcendent way of experiencing the world, where you're like experiencing this being, but you're also kind of like transmitting through your own kind of point of view what the world is, like what is the world. And I just love that about these poems. But I really wanted to ask you about your experience in religion, because it does seem to, and I wondered if some of those connections were made then, or if, like others, some of those connections were made only when you sort of stopped being a member of a religion.
That's a really good question. I mean, I think I was a Sunday school kid, and I was like a very church going person until I hit 13, 14, and I had a breakup with the Methodist Church, mainly over some homophobia that I experienced in a youth group, and I remember coming home and saying, like, Mom, I don't get it. Like, I thought this was all about love, and then someone said something snide and no one corrected them, and what's the real position here? And she said, well, I don't think that God believes that, and I don't think that Jesus believes that. And I was like, well, then someone needs to come give a formal correction, and until that formal correction occurs, I will not be attending. And it was a really tough thing, I mean, personally in our family, but I never went back. And I think only really in my adult life have I started having sort of dipping my toe in the sort of God water again. Dana Levin said, I find these poems God curious.
Curious.
And I thought, that's maybe what it is. I think I'm naturally kind of a seeker, and I think that's probably what makes me a writer. I think I have many more questions than answers, which is why I'm like very comfortable with ideas of spirituality and reading lots of books and being very open to different approaches. But I have not squarely landed any place that feels comfortable to me, because most of the places where one would land feel like places of knowing to me. And I have a questionable relationship with the idea of faith, but I am very open to my whole idea about life in general, including higher power or spirituality, is like, who's to say? I don't know. I have no idea. I definitely think there are times in my life, and I write about it in one of these poems, where I've needed to believe in something, but needing to believe in something is not the same thing as naturally finding yourself in a position of belief.
Needing to believe is not the same thing as believing.
It's not. So wishing you had faith and having faith are different things. Mm-hmm. And so I think I still have enough of a skeptic's mind where I'm not able to like fully wade in to anything, but I'm sort of always hovering on the periphery and asking lots of questions of myself and of the world, and waiting for answers. And I'm always open. I'm open to those.
I love that. That's such a great answer. I think that I'm always interested to find out how poets became poets, because that's always such an interesting question to me. And I'm always interested when I hear anybody discuss a religious upbringing or a lack of religious upbringing. I always want to know, like, what's your deal?
Is it? Yeah. And so I'm raising my kids completely opposite to how I was raised. There's no religion in our house at all. And my position is if you gravitate towards something, you'll find it and it will find you, and it all will be well. But until then, like, live compassionately and be open to other people's ideas. And if you need something, you can find it.
Yeah. I was raised in a large Latino family. My grandparents were super Catholic, super religious, but my parents, for whatever reason, just were not at all. And we didn't have any of that. And I was always like, all my friends were always going to like catechism class. It was just like, so alluring to me, but I didn't have that. And so I grew up with this sort of like an open space. Like I almost feel like it's like an open space in terms of like spirituality and religion and the question of like God and that relationship. Whereas my husband was raised Southern Baptist and had like a very similar, but very dramatic,
yes.
Like this is all I don't agree with any of the politics of this religion. I don't want to be here. I don't believe any of it. Like it was very, and it was like a very conservative, obviously, Southern Baptist church. And so, we got together in life and it's like we watch each other sort of, you can't help but sort of bring that entire experience into any of the sort of, many, many issues surrounding like spirituality or religion. And so, he was like super allergic when I would sort of be like, oh gosh, I really love the moment in the Catholic Church when blah, blah, blah. And he would just be like, churches, like, no, it's like, I can't go there. And of course, we've both softened over the years.
Yeah.
Softened to religion over the years, but it's just so interesting to think because it really does, I think, put you in a position, you can't help it, it's like that's your experience, you can't help it. It can't help but sort of set you in some way, perspective wise. Just thinking about that and going off of that, I wondered if you would read the poem for my next trick on page 41.
Oh, sure.
So this is, in some ways, be asking these questions.
This is one of the oldest poems in the book. I started it years and years ago and couldn't figure out how to do it. Like it just caused me fits. I really had a hard time getting all the pieces to click together the way I wanted them to, like the conversation and the metaphor and I didn't know what to do with it. And so it took me a long time. So if this one feels easy, it wasn't. This was a problem child. This is for my next trick. Where was I? She asks. Before I was in your body, what was I? You were nowhere, I tell her. Nothing. Then where do we go next? She presses, keeps pressing. Back to nothing? If I could believe, I'll see her again, waking from whatever this world is into another world, I would. Even if the ending is so tidy, it spoils the whole story. We can't talk about birth without talking about death, can't talk about death without talking about separation, that thick black redaction. Do I tell her we end like a book, the end? That when we're gone, too gone, to miss or even remember each other? She knows what vanish means. Pretending to do magic, she says it as a verb. For my next trick, I'll vanish you. I tell her the stars are the exception, burned out, but still lit. No, not ghosts, not exactly. Nothing to be scared of. Yeah, I mean, that's that need, right? Like if I could naturally believe that after this life, I'll get to be with my children, you better believe that I would sign right up. Like, where do I sign? Mm-hmm. And yet I do not. The fact that I need it doesn't mean that I believe that to be true as much as I wish that I did. Mm. And that's sort of the idea that, even if that seems so neat that it kind of ruins the whole story, like it's just too tidy, like it's just too perfect that we leave this life and we get to keep being with the people we love. Like Of course we all want that. I'd love to think that my grandparents who've passed are up, having a tea in some place in the clouds right now. But like at my core, that's not really what I think. And so having death talks with kids, it's really about having separation talks. Like we won't be together anymore. And that I think is the hardest part. Like the idea of separation, I don't really worry about the pain of dying. I worry about not seeing them anymore. And so then that's the whole idea of, well, but if I'm not alive and I have no consciousness, I won't be missing anyone.
Oh, yes.
So that whole thing, like, I'm a person who's like the things I studied in college were poetry and philosophy. And at the time it seemed, I loved it. I just basically took classes that I thought were interesting. And so I just kept taking those classes. And I joke now that I was like the least employable college graduate ever because I studied philosophy and poetry. But now it seems to make perfect sense to me. Like I'm just working through the same stuff, I'm just doing it. I'm doing it in poems.
Yes.
Yeah.
What you just were articulating, I feel like I have to make a very clumsy sort of association in order to ask you to read my very favorite poem from this book, because I know we're about to have questions come in and I really can't stand for it to end without you reading the poem Bride on page 102, because there's a line in this poem that kind of like articulates what you were just, I don't know, about the idea of separation and the idea that like,
yeah,
and that we might become our own,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna, I don't want to spoil it.
Okay.
So don't paraphrase the poem. It's the worst. It's the worst.
I love that. I'm like, here's the Cliff's Notes version. Okay, this is Bride. How long have I been wed to myself, calling myself darling, dressing for my own pleasure, each morning choosing perfume to turn me on? How long have I been alone in this house, but not alone, married less to the man than to the woman, silvering with the mirror? I know the kind of wife I need, and I become her, the one who will leave this earth at the same instant I do. I am my own bride, lifting the veil to see my face. Darling, I say, I have waited for you all my life. Right? If you are your own spouse, you never have to worry about who goes first.
Right.
Because you go at the same time.
This poem is doing all of this intellectual work, and it's doing all of this craft and poetic work and lyrical work and metaphorical work. But I just like, this poem is so radical to me because it is a poem about the relationship with the self. It's like a radical declaration of self-love. And it's,
I love that. I love that.
Beautiful. It's such a beautiful and affirming poem. And that's one of the things that's so surprising about it, especially in context to these other poems. And is that out of an absence or out of a loss, it's not simply moving on. It's about becoming, and not just accepting, but saying, I'm the one I've been looking for all my life. And it just fills me with this sort of it fills me with a sense of like hope that I think is just so beautiful. And I think it's radical. And I think it's like a poem that I want my daughter to read,
Thank you. It's fun. I wrote this poem during a really sad time. And I think I even surprised myself with the turn in the poem. When you're writing something and you don't quite know where it's going. And I remember sort of like writing my way through the poem and getting to the veil and then realizing it was my face, which I didn't really know, like I was writing it and I was like, oh no, that's the thing. Like, it's me. And then I remember thinking like, oh, it's me. And like actually having that realization. So it's funny. I don't feel like the hope I had at the end of the poem, I didn't actually feel when I sat down to write the beginning of the poem. I sort of got there in the of writing it and surprised myself with how, despite the loss, how that sort of realization of wholeness was big for me. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not, we always say like my other half, my better half. And I like that realization of wholeness, the meaning, I mean, integrity means wholeness. Like the whole idea of that surprised me in the poem and was sort of a relief.
Yes.
So I'm so glad you liked that one.
Oh, I just adore it. I adore that poem. I adore this book. I am sincerely envious of people who have not yet read it.
You're so kind. Oh, thank you.
And I'll just hop back on. I love this conversation, and I do a lot of events, and just like you guys took me places tonight I was not expecting.
We went there, didn't we, for a Friday night?
Yeah, great happy hour right now. No, it was lovely, and there are plenty of audience questions, or quite a handful, so I do want to get to them. Well, first, there's just, let's see, there's a compliment I want to get to. Let me see if I can find it. Megan says the poems throughout this book may speak to a time, but to her, it feels timeless. And I appreciate the meaning of these poems as they were presented today. So just always like to start with a compliment when there's a compliment. That was from Megan.
Thank you, Megan.
And then the first question I'll ask is from Emily. She says she's an amateur poet, but how do you know when to share a draft with others for feedback? What qualities do you look for in a first reader? Those are the only two questions. I don't know why I took a weird pause. So,
okay. No.
When do you know
what listening to poets read? It's we weird pause in the middle of things. Well, I have to say first that the root origin of the word amateur is amare, which means to love. So if you're an amateur at something, it just means that you're doing something that you love. It doesn't mean you're not good at it yet. So I would say embrace that. When do I know when a piece of work is ready to share with others? Well, it depends on who the other is. I'm really comfortable sharing a very rough draft with a close friend. And so I would say, maybe there are people in your life that you can share something really rough with because there's no judgment there. And it's great to have those readers. And then maybe there's like that next step where I feel like I would read something in front of someone, or maybe send something out to a journal or send it to my editor. And it's hard to know when it's ready. I always feel like there's sort of like there's where the poem is as far as I've gotten it. And then there's where the poem I think can go with some work. And that gap is sometimes frustrating when you can kind of see the potential in a piece, but you're not quite getting there. And I often go to other people to help me close the gap. Sometimes I can't do it on my own. And so I think it's important to find a trusted reader or two, even before you get to the point of sending it off to a journal or getting up at an open mic. Somebody who will be honest with you, kind, but honest, and maybe just ask you some questions about the piece. Like, did you mean for it to do this? Or why did you choose this line length? Or what do you think about this title? And just finding those people who are willing to give you some kind but honest feedback is so helpful. Not that you have to take the feedback, right? I mean, you don't want to end up with a Franken poem that is sort of just pieced together, like a Frankenstein of a poem pieced together from other people's ideas and opinions. It all has to be filtered through your own vision for what the poem should be. But finding a writer's group or signing up for an online workshop or, taking a class and maybe finding a good reader that way, I think would be what I would do. I still send my poems to a grad school friend, and I've been sending her poems for 20 years.
And then There's a question from me because I am in the audience tonight, and I'm curious. I talk to a lot of fiction writers, and I don't talk to many poets, even though a lot of fiction writers are poets, I guess.
Oh, but yeah,
I,
Carrie, both.
yes. So for both of you, I would love to know. I'm just curious, how long, like from gestation, from an idea to when it's finally complete for you, how long? I know every poem is different, but like on average, do you spend thinking about a poem, writing a poem, editing a poem? What does that look like? Because I've talked to writers who are like, it took me 10 years to write this first book, but poems are slightly different.
It depends. Sometimes some poems really do come out in a day. Like you get the idea and it kind of picks up speed and it's like, tumbling downhill, picking up momentum, and then maybe a little bit of revision happens after the fact. But some days I could get a solid draft out. It more often than not takes weeks or months for me because I need to put things away and let them steep a little bit and then come back to them with fresh eyes. So it varies, but it is not unusual for it to take 3 or 4 or 5 months from the first image to like a solid draft I feel comfortable sending out for publication. I don't know, Carrie, what about you? Are you faster than me?
I feel like I have literally no way of knowing. I was just sitting like, why? I have no idea how long it takes. I think maybe that's because most of my poems begin as like a daily poem that I write, and I try to write every day. That's a hilarious thing to say right now at the moment I'm in my life right now, that I try to write every day, because I haven't been able to do that lately, but summertime and everything. But something will start and then you don't even know why you go back to something and go like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot about this. And you take something, and I guess there have been poems that have come like kind of in a day or in a couple of drafts, but oh gosh, who knows? I mean, there were poems in my latest book of poems that just came out that like had been taken from poems that didn't even make it, like that didn't make it into my first book of poems. That I was sort of like in the process of kind of gathering poems together, went to some distant folder on my computer and found something and was like, oh gosh, this is kind of, I'm going to see where this goes, and often goes in a totally different direction. And sometimes poems will become other poems, and it's but I do think it is kind of similar though to the way that people write fiction, stories changing, and it's just a bigger thing.
Mm-hmm. I love the idea of cannibalizing from oneself, because I do the same thing. Like sometimes I'll find one shining stanza or line or image in a poem that refuses to get up off the ground.
Yeah.
And I might be able to scrap the rest of it, but then extract that one good, dust it off and plop it into something else, or maybe make it work with like combine 2 drafts into a super draft. Sometimes that works.
Yeah.
And then we are running out of time because I was bad at managing your conversation, which was so amazing, so I let it go longer. But the last question, I didn't warn you this, I would ask this before the conversation, so it's okay to take a moment because it's easy to blank. Who are you reading now that inspires you? Poets, essayists, novelists, whatever. What's inspiring you right now, both of you?
I'm just looking at the stack of books. So I reshelve my books alphabetically. So usually the books that I have most recently read are still sitting on my desk because I've been too lazy to put them back because I have to remember where they go. It's like having to reshelve at the library. So what do I have on my desk right now that I have read recently? Oh, look, it's Carrie Fountain's The Life. Camille Dungy's Trophic Cascade is up here. Ellen Bass's Indigo. Victoria Chang's Obit is up here. Sharon Old's old classic Stag's Leap, which is like a good divorce book of poems as any you'll find. And I have some Yehuda Amichai up here too that I really love. So I've been reading mostly poems this summer. I went through sort of a memoir kick there for a while, but now I've been reading mostly poems. Carrie, what are you reading?
I'm not anywhere around my books, and this question always plagues me because my mind goes blank, and then we will disconnect, and I will be like, oh my God, I love that. I just finished that. I like read that last week, and I just finished it. And of course, my mind goes to like things that I've read like a year ago that I really loved. But I really have been like, I've loved reading the novelist Miriam Taves. Her name is spelled Toews, but it's pronounced Taves. So you might recognize the name as it's spelled, not pronounced. But her books have knocked my socks off. All My Puny Sorrows. I love that book. Oh my gosh. Oh shit. See, this is like my worst nightmare because now I can't remember the title of Mark Wunderlich's newest book.
Oh yes. Okay, that one's a good one.
So fabulous. It is so fabulous. It's really great.
I just how he does it.
What?
I don't know how he does it.
No,
like I read these poems and I'm like, what did you just do? It's amazing.
It's easy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he's an amazing poet. I just finished this book called What Are You Going Through by Sigrid Nunez, a novel, just like really great. And I'm going to think of a million other books, but the things that I'm like always reading kind of, and I loved Indigo by Ellen Bass.
Book is
I've been rereading and rereading that book. That and Goldenrod have been on my morning. I can't read at night. I can't read before I go to bed at night. I have a very sensitive nervous system. So I read the first thing when I wake up in the morning. I read for like about an hour and a half. And I go through, I have a stack of books and I'll read some from each. And I've just adored that book. She is a true, she's just not only just a great poet. I just want to learn how to live from her, like how to like go through life. She just seems like a really amazing spirit and an amazing person. Agreed. So, but I love that book, Indigo.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for those suggestions and what you're reading, because that's a big insight for me for writers. I like just to hear what has been on your mind. Thank you for joining Tattered Cover. I'd like to give you an opportunity. Where can we find you on the internet? Everyone's following everyone. Do you have a website, Twitter? Where should your readers find you if they don't know right now?
Well, if people Google me, they'll probably find the Dame, unless they put poet at the end. So it's maggiesmithpoet.com, or on social media, it's Maggie Smith Poet. So you don't find someone who's British and twice my age.
And I have a website, carriefountain.com, and I'm actually just launching some longer-ish workshops I teach workshops, and I've been doing it online. For some reason, I switched to online workshops and I really loved it. So I'm continuing that. So carriefountain.com, and I'm also on social media. I'm no dame. I think I'm the only weird Carrie Fountain out there on social media. Well, I'm sure that's not actually true, but you'll find me.
Well, awesome. And you can find us at tatteredcover.com. We have social media, but go to our website, buy Carrie and Maggie's books. You can find them all over tatteredcover.com. Just search their names. Thank you, ladies, so much for an amazing conversation on a Friday night. I know we were talking about like, who shows up to a virtual event on a Friday night. So many readers out there.
Yay!
Oh, nice. Thanks, all.
And thanks all the readers who did spend your Friday evening with us. It means a lot. Check out tatteredcover.com/event for more events. This will be on YouTube for you to share and love and send to all your friends shortly. So please share it. Everyone have a great night. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for writing this book, Maggie.
Bless your heart. Good night, all.